Hey everyone, Tim from Chamferzone here. Welcome back to another Blender tutorial. In the previous one, we were looking into the fundamentals of modeling in Blender, things such as basic navigation, tools, modifiers, as well as free plugins. And this time we're going to apply those things and create a game-ready flashbang grenade. For that, we will be looking into the low and high poly creation process, as well as making the unwrap for the low poly, and then preparing everything for the bake that follows after this tutorial in Marmoset Toolbag 4. So there's a whole lot of things packed into it, and if you ever get stuck along the way, come join us at the Chamferzone Discord, where we have a really nice and helpful community going. More tutorials coming in the near future. Next one's gonna be a weapon tutorial, also making use of Blender, and it will release on my Gumroad marketplace as well as other marketplaces. And speaking of which, I don't have a Patreon page, but if you want to support my free tutorial efforts, you can get this one bundled together with the previous one, also on my Gumroad marketplace as a Patreon package. So I hope you're gonna like the tutorial. Let's get started with the flashbang. Happy modeling and cheers! Hey everyone, let's start with a new scene. I'm gonna press A to select everything, X to delete, and then in our scene properties, let's put the units on length to centimeters. I'm gonna press 5 on numpad to go in orthographic view, then hit the tilt key, the one under escape, and go into the left view. Press Shift A, and then we wanna add a reference image. So this one here is our main reference image, and as you can see it says 13.3 centimeters is the overall height for the grenade. So now I'm gonna add a cube, and I expand the properties and I put it to 13.3 as well. So now you can see that this is actually much smaller here in the scene, and that means we can now put it to transparency mode, Alt-Z, then we select the reference image, go over to our scale mode, and then we want to make sure to bring that within this boundary box so that when we look at our reference image, we know we are looking at the right size. If you press Shift, you can be more precise here with the scaling. And then once we have that, we can then just double check here in our box. And essentially this box is really only for reference for the right size, and then we can press X and delete it. And we can then start with the cylinder that has 6 sides, as we see here on that reference. I'm gonna press Shift A, bring in a cylinder. Let's put that to 6 sides. And then we wanna bring that down here on the radius. Let's also enable Alt-Z so that we have it transparent, so that we actually see what we're doing. And then we're just gonna use these sliders here to bring it to the proper radius. So in that case, we need even more. What I'm gonna do is have it here at 2.2. So now we can take this in the Move tool here, which I have on W, and bring it down so that it fits our reference. And now what I want to do is disable that grid here so that it doesn't look so noisy. So as the next thing, I'm going to go over to edit mode, and in vertex mode, let's select the upper row of vertex points. Make sure you are in X-ray mode so that you also select the back faces. And let's bring the upper ones and the ones at the bottom a little bit up, so that it looks like that. I'm gonna select these faces here on the top and then press X, and we wanna actually get rid of them so that we only have the outer shell left. Let me take that reference image and bring it back a bit so that we have this clear here in the scene. So now I'm gonna press Alt to have the upper edge loop, and with Shift also selecting the one at the bottom, and then right click and subdivide. And now I'm gonna have the number of cuts set to a 5. And then I'm gonna have the upper edge loop selected and I press D for extrude. I have it on D. Snap it back by letting the right mouse button go and then just drag it up so that it's perfectly straight. And I actually want to go over here to our references and I want to show you the loop tools here. Mesh loop tools. I'm going to have that activated. It comes with Blender, so you don't need to install it. And then we can make right click and say circle. So now we have this perfect circle and we can scale it here so that it fits the size of our reference. And then I want to select these edges here with Shift. And then I'm going to press M and say collapse. So that way we don't need to have that many polygons there. And now I'm going to select all these faces, press Ctrl and I to reverse the selection, then press X and delete the faces. So that leaves us only here with those. I'm going to go over here to our orthographic view and transparency mode. And what I want to do, actually let me undo that. I'm going to select these faces and then scale them up so that they are both the same at the top and at the bottom. Now with this center edge, we're going to do the same thing and just make that tile look like we have it on the reference. So now what we can do is go over to our object mode and take a look how our pivot is still perfectly centered at 0. Now we're gonna take our JMesh plugin and make use of the circle array. We're gonna have 6 item counts. We can then close this and go over to our modify properties. And in here we wanna merge it. Let's put first and last copies on and then distance 0.05. That means we now have it welded. We can go over to our vertex mode and just drag one of these vertex points to double check, but you can see everything's welded. So let's also take care of the bottom. I'm gonna make an edge loop, press D to extrude, snap it back, and then I'm gonna press S, Z, and 0. That way we have it perfectly aligned here on the Z axis. And then let's just drag it up and let's make use of that loop tools circle again. And then we can use the scale tool and adjust it so that it looks like we have it here on our reference image. We don't have much of a space there, so we can just leave it something like that here. We press F to fill and then I for inset. And now with that selection, let's press M and collapse it. So then let's select the upper edge loop and also extrude it. I'm gonna extrude, snap it back, and then we can draw it up the whole way perfectly straight. I'm going to grow the selection, Ctrl and plus, then press the P key and separate by selection. So now we have a new object here. And what I want to do is take that reference image, and in order for you to see better what I'm doing, I'm gonna bring the transparency down. So we still see it, but now you can see my key commands here at the corner right. So next, let's go back to that object that we separated out. I'm gonna press Ctrl and A to make a ring selection, and then I subdivide it 4 times. So that we have more edges here that we can work with. So now let's draw a selection so that we have these faces selected. I reverse the selection and delete the faces. So now we want to make a Boolean operation for which we need a new cylinder here. And I'm gonna put it to radius 1, same for depth. And then the vertex count, let's have it at 18. Actually gonna bring that further down here, the radius 0.5. We can leave the depth as it is. And now let's just rotate it 90 degrees. Let's press Ctrl to make a snap in a 5-degree angle. And on the upper left, you can always see what angle you have. In that case, we want 90. And now I'm gonna scale that up a bit here. And also I want to rotate it so that we have these vertex points here pointing to the top and to the bottom, if you know what I mean. Next, let's use our JMesh tool. I'm gonna have this selection here and then use the picker to select the other one. Put it to difference and uncheck apply immediately. So now you can see that actually looks a bit messed up. Let's go to our modifiers and put that to fast. Now you can see that actually looks what it should look like. We can then apply the modifier and select that object, the Boolean operator, and say X and delete. It also left that piece here for us, which I'm also going to delete. We don't need that. So now with that selection here, let's delete the left half of it. And now we can clean that up here. And later we copy it back into place with the array modifier. So I'm going to select these vertex points and press J and do the same thing over here and also over here. So it's just a matter now of connecting these, and then what we can do with that and that is to select them and say dissolve edges. Same here. Let's delete them, or dissolve I should say, and this loop here as well. So these here, same thing. Let's connect them. Press J to join. And now let's dissolve this edge here, and also before we dissolve that, let's take these two and also press J. And then actually let me undo that. I want to have it here. And then also here, let's join that. And now let's go back here. I'm gonna dissolve these edges. And these ones here, we also want to get rid of them. Dissolve. And now we have this nice and clean. And now what we can do with that is use our JMesh. We still have the pivot in the center and we say to Y. That immediately welds it. You can see this is one vertex point now. And now we can use our circle array once again. And same as before, we're gonna have 6 items. We can then close it. And then also same as before, we want to go over here to our modifier for it. Go over to merge and put that to a lower threshold, 0.01. Now we can apply that. And then what I want to do is shade smooth it. And actually, before I do anything else, I want to switch over to our modeling tab so that we have more screen space available. I'm just going to zoom back in and go back into orthographic view. And now let's go back here to this element. I'm going to make a copy of it. Just bring that up, and then we make use of our cat transform. While we are in vertex mode, then we press G to move it. And we snap it here onto one of these vertex points so that it connects properly. Now we go into our vertex mode and bring the whole selection down here while we are in transparency mode so that we can select the back faces. And this one here we can also adjust better. So now with that element, we are gonna do the same thing again. Shift D. Snap it back, and then we can also bring it up like that so that it already is perfectly aligned on the Z-axis, but that doesn't make a difference because we're just gonna snap it anyway. So now we have these elements here, and we just want to make sure that also the height here is correct. So I'm gonna bring that up a bit, and also these points here. And now what we do is with Shift, we make a selection and then we press Ctrl J to join it. So now I'm gonna go over to vertex mode, select everything here while we are in our edit mode again. And then under Mesh, you can go over here to merge by distance, and you can see how that welded everything together. And we can also change the threshold if you're getting any issues there. So make sure it's a low enough threshold, but that you also see that it actually welded something. Next, I'm gonna add the solidify modifier, and let's put the thickness to 0.25, and I'm gonna put the mode to complex. And over here in our properties, I'm gonna put the auto smooth on so that this actually looks nice. Otherwise, it's just one smoothing group. So next, I'm gonna have this element here, and I wanna make a copy of it, Shift D, and then I'm gonna bring it up here. I'm actually gonna put the pivot to the center here. When we go to the interactive tools, you can make a quick origin that centers our pivot. And then what I'm gonna do is go over to rotate, and then we're gonna snap it with the control button pressed so that we have a 5-degree snap, and that way it's perfectly 180-degree rotated. And now we can use our cat transform again while we are in the vertex mode. And now let's just snap it back here onto that other element. So now we have made use of the same element from the bottom at the top, and we didn't have to do the work twice. So we are gonna treat these objects differently though. I'm gonna take this element here and say F on it while we have an edge loop for it. And then I'm gonna use the inset to essentially have an extra loop there. And then that selected loop we can bring up with a extrude. So I'm gonna just take it in isolation mode so that we see better what we're doing here. Jump around in and out of it sometimes. And then another inset followed by yet another extrude. So this element now we can move all the way up here. And then we can also press X on that. And we want to just delete those faces because we will never see those. Next, I'm going to select these elements, grow the selection. So now we can separate that out here. So it becomes a new object. Then this bottom piece, let's fill it, or let's collapse it, so that we don't have a hole there. I'm gonna go back to that object here. And now I'm gonna select every second edge, and we can repeat that action by pressing Shift, Control, and Numpad plus. So now what I wanna do with that selection is to make a ring selection. We can do that through shortcut or here, edge rings. And now what we can do with that is to collapse it so that this is not so dense. We can save a few polys there. I'm gonna take that loop and I wanna give it a bit of a bevel here with 2 segments. And now we are out of isolation mode. This looks nice. So we can also take another look here at the reference for that centerpiece. And we want to add a bit more thickness at the top. For that, I'm going to use this edge cut tool, bring in some extra loops here, then switch over to vertex mode, take that selection and scale it up. So that way we have this element there that we see on the reference, and I'm gonna bevel that so that is a bit smoother looking. And also I want to take that here, subdivide it, and then take that loop and bring that down a bit. So now this mimics our reference more. And I'm gonna also bevel this so that it's more smooth. So next, let's work on our fuse, for which we're gonna add a new cylinder to the scene. And then let's also lower our radius. So I'm gonna have the radius at 1.1. Let's put the depth to 3 and vertice count 32. We can still always adjust that, but that seems to fit it quite well here. I'm gonna bring that up and position it so that it fits our reference. And in the vertex mode, we can then further push these here up. And now let's think about how we add this element there. I'm looking at my reference image on my second monitor, by the way, but you can always zoom out and take a look at the reference in the background too. So now we have basically this piece here sticking out. I want to take these vertex points and join them together, because we have to think about how to best work on these elements, these shapes that we see, which on the fuse is a little bit tricky. So the approach here is to take these vertex points, join them, and then also do the same here on that side. Later we can use the symmetry modifier. So let's just focus on one side for now. So now we have these faces here that we can work with, and I'm gonna extrude them up. So let's take this all the way up here. And by the way, these faces here, I'm gonna just press X and delete them. We can get them back later, but it's easier to focus on that without all the stuff on top. I'm gonna bevel this here. And what I also want to do is join these points here together so that we don't have some n-gons there. And then we can take that vertex point and push it down. So we have a bit of a smoother corner there. I'm gonna use the JMesh plugin to mirror it, add a mirror modifier. And then let's just bisect and flip it on the x-axis. So now we're doing everything on one side, but also see it on the other side. I'm gonna take these points here and delete the faces on them, so that now we have only these edges here that we can select and extrude out, snap it back, and then drag it back out. I'm gonna take this edge here and I want to dissolve it. And now we can take that vertex point and move it over here. I'm gonna bring that down a bit, because later we're gonna have this lever on top of it. So now I'm using the bevel and pressing V to make a vertex bevel. Same here, Control B followed by V. And that way we can make a nice round bevel there, even if we are in vertex mode. I'm gonna use the loop cut tool and add an extra edge loop here. And then while we are in our face mode, I'm gonna select these faces and extrude them out. And I like to snap it back then. And I'm also gonna align it here, S, Y, and 0. And then bring up these vertex points here. So that way we have this shape here already formed. So now that I look at that, let's actually take the vertex points that we have at the bottom, once we are in our X-ray mode, and bring that up a bit. So this is better aligned there with the other element. Now I'm gonna also get rid of these faces here at the top. And let's take it into isolation mode and have a look at it here from the bottom. And then once we are again in X-ray to see more, I'm gonna get rid of these vertex points as well. And now we can take these edges here all the way here to that point, and then press D to extrude, snap it back, and then just center it. Draw it to the center. And now let's take these edges here, select that one with Shift and press F to fill. Same over here. Let's connect that with a fill. So now we have that filled again there at the top. I'm gonna go here to the back side of that thing, and I want to select these faces here, only one of them. Use the inset, and then here we can uncheck boundary so that this is coming out together. I'm gonna use another inset, and now I'm gonna say S, Z, and 0 to align it. And then we can bring that further down here so that we have a bit of a volume there at the back. And these edges here, I'm gonna get rid of it. Remember, we have our symmetry on, so we only need to do it on one side. And now let's go back here to that element. And we need to have a cylinder there. So let's add one. I'm gonna use our cue blocker. Put the cylinder count to 18, and then we can draw that here into place. And you can see how that actually comes right off our geometry that we already have there. So I'm gonna go over to item and put it to 0 on the x-axis so that it's perfectly centered there. So let's add a mirror modifier and let's put it to Z on axis and on bisect. Now with that element, I want to push these vertex points a little bit more to the inside. So I'm going to select them, and let me undo that. We have to be in the X-ray mode so that this is a bit more aligned here with this other element. Now let's go to face mode, select this face, and let's use our inset to make that a bit more interesting looking, even though that's not actually on the reference like that. But sometimes I just like to add a few details here and there to make it more interesting. And now that I look here at this, we got an issue here where I want to delete these faces in the center, or that face in the center, which somehow was still showing. It wasn't really bisecting it, so let's just delete it there. And now let's take another look here at how we can combine these shapes. First, let's bring in these vertex points there so that this is properly covered here by that object. And now what we can do is use our Boolean operation. First, I'm going to apply the mirror on both these objects. And now I select this object and I use the JMesh tool. I'm gonna use the target picker here on that element. Say delete after apply. And then let's make a union out of it. And then here under our modifier, I'm gonna put it to self. So with this being one element, let's go over here and auto smooth that. And then let's add a mirror modifier, which we can also do once again through our JMesh plugin. Let's add this modifier and let's have it to X on both the axis, bisect and flip. And now with the edge loop cut, let's have another edge loop here, and then we can connect that here with that element. So sometimes it's hard to see what we have selected, and I want to enable statistics, and now you can see that we have 2 vertex points selected here. So we should actually always have the selection on. And then I'm just gonna also join it here at the bottom. So both at the top and at the bottom we have some connections here. And I want to go over to our target weld, for which we can use the interactive tools. And then let's just weld that a bit more here. Let me also put our threshold here to 0.001, because otherwise the target welding can sometimes cause some things to be welded that we don't actually want to weld. Now let's go back to vertex mode, and then with Shift we just select each one of these vertex points here and then just join it together so that we have proper connections here. This one here, I'm gonna say dissolve vertex. I don't need that one there. And then we can just go ahead here and further connect that so that we have some clean topology here. So let's just take a look around, and also over here we can connect it. This is always essential to do after each Boolean operation. And also here at the top we have another n-gon where we should already dictate the triangulation. So let's connect that, and then back here on that piece I'm gonna make an inset and collapse it, and then I want to grow the selection like that, and this whole element I'm gonna scale a little bit in because that was a bit too thin looking. I'm gonna go and turn off target weld, and now let's work on our lever. I'm gonna make a copy of this edge loop, snap it back, separate out that selection, and then reselect it here. Now we have that ring selected, and I'm gonna go over here, and actually our pivot point needs to be in the center. So let's use our interactive tool here, say quick origin. And now let's scale that up a bit, that selection that we were just copying out and separating. Now let's go to vertex mode and select the upper row and delete these vertex points. And then we can select only that one vertex point here. So let's go to our move tool. I'm pressing D for extrude, right mouse button to snap it back, and then we can draw it up perfectly straight. And same here to the side. And then let's take that over here, and then we can just take it all the way down here, same as our reference. And that way we can work on our lever here. Same here, I snap it back and then I just bring it down all the way. And then one more here to go. Again, I snap it back and put it here to the side. And now with that shape consisting only out of the vertex points together with the edges, I'm gonna bevel it. Control B and V will then make a vertex bevel, and let's give it a few extra edges here, which we can do with a mouse wheel. Same over here. Let's make it nice and round. And here, let's also have a nice curve. And same as here. Doesn't have to be too dense in some of these places, but it's always good to have a bit of a bevel. So now let's take this lever here into isolation mode. And you may have already noticed it, that we still have the mirror modifier on it because we copied it from an object earlier, these edges that had the mirror modifier, which copies the modifier as well. We don't want that, so I'm just going to delete it. And now you can see the pivot point is centered here around these edges, and we want it to be in the 0 center. So I'm going to apply the transforms here, so that we have it perfectly centered at 0, and now we can extrude it with D. And then we're gonna take this here into the center and put the mirror modifier on. I put it to bisect and flip on the X, and essentially now we have this shape here with some volume. I'm just gonna subdivide it here so that we have a bit more polys to work with. I'm going to take these vertex points and put it here where we see on the reference that we have an object coming out of there, or another element. Now what I'm going to do is make a ring selection, subdivide it once more. And let's go over here to our face selection mode from the top and delete these faces. So that already gives us more of the shape that we also see on our reference. I'm gonna have another subdivision here in the center, and then also here on the upper part I'm gonna have 3 more edges. And now let's take a look at it here from the back. I'm gonna select these vertex points all the way from the bottom to there and bring it further here to the X center. Now that vertex point we can also adjust manually, and we're just gonna basically shape this nice curve here with the vertex points that we already have there. So now we have this element here. So let me just select these edges again here at the center. Press Alt to select all of them, and then under Item, I'm gonna center it at 0. So as a next thing, let's work on these elements that are folding down here from the sides. For that, we already have our edges in place. I'm gonna select this edge and then press Ctrl to make a connected edge loop there. And then with D, we extrude it out here to the side. We can then go over here to the left view and make sure that our edge flow is nice. Go back here to the back perspective, draw out another loop, and then again we position it like that. And now I'm gonna have one more that I snap back, and I just bring it down here like that. So I'm gonna go over here to vertex mode, press S, Y, and 0 to make sure that it's aligned there. So before we work on that curve, let's go over here to that one. And while we are in vertex mode, I'm gonna select these points and then scale it on the Y-axis, push it over a bit here to the left side. And then individually, I'm gonna move these vertex points so that we have a nice dense curve there. And this one here, I'm also gonna position up there. And then this one here, we can take all the way here over to that point, as well as that here, we also wanna bring it up. And this one here, I'm also gonna bring up. So now I'm gonna select that vertex point and then Ctrl B, and we press V to make a vertex bevel. And that gives us this nice curve here. And basically it's just a matter of fine-tuning it here. So we just select some of these points individually. This one here I'm gonna bring over here to the right side, same as this. And that one here could also need a bevel. Doesn't need to have that many edges. We can always use the mouse wheel to adjust that. And that gives us pretty much this nice shape here. So let's take another look around. I want to add the solidify modifier on top. And as you can see right now, we need to put the proper settings. I'm going to put it to complex. And then our thickness 0.05 works fine, but you can see that this is not perfectly straight now. For that, we're gonna put our offset to 0. So now you can see that this is nice and straight. Let's just take another look around it, make sure everything looks okay. And now what I want to do is add a little bit more thickness here, 0.07, or let's meet in the half, 0.06. So how about giving that one here also another bevel? First I'm going to bring it in like that, and then Ctrl B, and then pressing V will once again give us the vertex bevel. So now I want to introduce you to a new plugin, which is really great. You can see that sometimes the modifier view is quite crowded. So this add-on here, which is free, is really amazing. What you want to do is go over here to the GitHub and you save out the latest version. It might not be the same that I have here. Maybe they already updated it. And then what we do is, once we're back in Blender, we go over to our Edit Preferences, and then under Add-ons, we install it. We navigate to the location where we have it downloaded. And here we have our modifier list. And once we enable that, you now see that we have this nice view here where we always see exactly which modifiers are applied. And we have this great feature where we can hide everything that we have enabled as modifiers for the selection that we currently have active. That also works if we have multiple objects. So let's say these two here selected. If we toggle that, it will do it for everything. So this is really useful. And we can also remove the modifiers. We can apply them. So this is a great plugin to have. And basically in that case, I just want to apply it here on that lever. And then we can continue to work on this detail which we have there. I'm just gonna delete the right side of it so that we only work on the left side, and then we can later use the symmetry once again. In that case now, I just want to make sure that we have everything perfectly centered at 0, and that makes sure of it. So now there's one problem here with the snapping. I don't know why that is. I actually opened the bug report for it. Blender Foundation is currently looking into that, which is awesome. But basically we just want to get rid of bisect and flip. And we put it here to merge and clipping. And now we don't have that issue. So that's the reason why I wanted to have the vertex points perfectly centered at 0. And maybe in the future they're gonna fix that so that we can also use the bisect with a smaller threshold without having this clipping issue. So now let's work on this detail that we have there. I'm gonna use target weld, which by the way I also have here on our quick axis shortcuts. Otherwise you can find it on the interactive tools. And let's just connect these vertex points here. So now I'm using the knife tool, pressing K. And let's cut in the rest of this shape. Let's add a few extra vertex points there so that it's really nice and round. And then we press Enter to confirm once we are happy with it. I'm gonna go ahead, make some vertex connections here with our edge. And also here to the upper part, so that Blender knows how to triangulate that. And we might add more later. I'm actually gonna dissolve that one here, and I wanna use a connection down here. And then I'm gonna select these edges here with Shift, and I wanna subdivide it so that we have an extra edge loop there, because later we're gonna have a Boolean hole in there and we connect it to this. So let's go to face mode. I select this face, press Ctrl to select multiple faces. You can see this goes really fast. And with our mirror modifier, it also selects them on the other side. I'm gonna use Inset and uncheck boundary. Let me just undo that. Press Inset, and then with Control we can pull it out like that. So basically we're gonna eyeball a little bit the height, have something like that here. And now let's get rid of some of these edges. I'm gonna press Control to select the whole loop here, all the way down to here. And then what I want to do actually is not that menu, but pressing X and dissolving these edges. And then let's just connect it here like that. So that way we have less polys here, because this is also going to be our low poly later on. And now let's take a look at this here as well, where we can make some connections so that we don't have this n-gon forming there. Let's get out of the isolation mode, and right now I still have target weld enabled. I'm gonna turn it off. Sometimes that causes some issues if we leave it on. I'm gonna select that element here, Control B and V like Victor to make that extra loop, and then use inset to create this element here. And we can once again use Control to add some depth to it. Now from the front view, I just want to make sure that this is aligned here. And let's take another look at it. I'm just gonna scale it a little bit more here, like so. And as the next thing, we can work on these rings that we have here together with it. So for that, I'm gonna make use of a plugin that already comes with Blender, and it's called the Extra Objects. I already have it enabled. You can also enable it. And then if we press Shift and A, we can add a curve spiral Archimedean. So now we're gonna prepare that. Let's have it at around 42 edges or steps. And I'm gonna put the radius to 0.02. And then I'm gonna have our height put to 0.01. So let's have the turns set to 2. And now we can further adjust it here. Let's have a height of 0.001 or 2. And basically we just want to make sure that this shape is already prepared. Add a bit more height to it here. And then here under the geometry tab, we can add depth to it. 0.15. You can always play around with these numbers. I was already testing that before, so that's why I know that this works. And now we have a few elements here that are actually cut off. I'm gonna select these 2 vertex points and then grow the selection like so. And then I delete these vertex points. So that gives us exactly the shape that we have on our reference image. And then I'm just gonna lower the resolution. It doesn't have to be at 4, still round enough with 3. Fill the caps. And now we have this nice ring here. What I'm gonna do is rotate it 90 degrees. With Control we can snap it, and at the upper left you see that it's 90 degrees. And then I want to move it over here and also scale it up a bit. Position it in place. We're still gonna position it differently later. I just want to make sure we have the right dimension to compare that. So we want to have it there in that place where then we have to add this pin to it. So let's just position it like this here next to that lever. By the way, if you scale it like that, it will deform. But if you select only these edges or these curves, you can then scale it and it will remain the same depth. So that way we can always edit it later on. But we don't actually have to do that in that case. It was fine as it is. Just wanted to show that. So I'm gonna add now another one of these. Shift A. And then let's have another one of these Archimedean spirals. And let's head over here once again to our settings. I'm gonna have the steps turned down to 3. It was remembering the settings from the one before, so we have less work. And now I want to convert that to mesh. And the reason for that is that that allows us to further bevel these corners. I'm gonna select these vertex points here, not the one at the end. And then Control B and V to make this nice curve here. So now we essentially have this shape here in place. And now let's just take it out here and also rotate it 90 degrees. With Control, once again, we can snap it. And I just want to rotate it also here in that direction so that we really have a good reference here for the size of it. So now this is still a mesh. We have to convert it back into a curve so that we can add our depth to it once again. So let's see what works here in that case. I want to have less than before, so let's put it to 0.12. And also our resolution, we put it back to 3. And now let's just take a look here and rotate it back into this position that is this nice triangle here, and then let's put it here in place. I'm gonna use our reference here to put it in place where we have these pins that we're gonna work on in just a moment. You can see we have these pins here, and we also have some holes that we have to cut into the fuse. I'm just gonna select this vertex point here, grow the selection, and I want to delete them. And here on that side, I'm just gonna take the vertex and I'm gonna drag it here to that side. So now we actually have the real shape. We can then fill the caps. And now let's select that curve and scale it. That way we can scale it without actually deforming it. And let's just make sure we have a little bit of space there in between. That makes sure that when we bake it later, we don't get any issues. And now we can pull that a bit to the side here. And now I'm gonna actually have a little bit less depth. So this one here, I'm gonna put to 0.125. It was a bit too thick. So that one here, now we can once again scale, because now it's a little bit too wide there, the space. So let's just leave a little bit of space in between. And now we can take that object and we convert it once again back to being a mesh. So now we committed to it. It's now a mesh. And this one here right now is still a curve. We also want it to be a mesh. So now I'm gonna select that edge loop, bring up interactive tools and say quick origin. Now we have the pivot point there. And that selection, I'm gonna copy it, snap it back into place, right mouse button, separate out the selection, select it. And now we have this ring here that we can use for our pin. I'm gonna select that vertex point and delete it. Select these two vertex points. And then in that view here, we can just extrude it out, snap it back, and then perfectly straight, pull it out there. This vertex point I'm gonna move up. Then we select both of them. And then we can extrude that out here further. Snap it back, then pull it out there, and this one here I'm gonna take a bit further up here, and this one here we can then extrude, no actually bevel, Control B and V like Victor, and essentially that's this pin. We just want to convert it to being a curve so that we once again can add our depth to it. So I'm gonna have, in that case, a pretty low amount here so that it's not too big. Let's take that into isolation mode. And now I want to convert it to a mesh. So what I'm gonna do next is get rid of some of these edge loops, press Control. No, sorry. We press Shift and Alt to select multiple edge loops here. Just gotta make sure to select the right ones. These ones here. Then X, and we dissolve the edges. So that basically gives us our pin. And now let me just take another look here at this element. I want to select it in X-ray mode and just scale it up a bit, so that it's not so super firm there, intersecting with the other geometry. And now we can just copy that, duplicate, snap it back, and then pull it back into a place where it fits the other one as well. So that way we don't have to make two pins if we already have the other. And then we can select this shape here. What I'm gonna do is make a ring selection here, Control and Alt, and I want to subdivide it. Take this loop here, and we can also use that to add to our geometry. Make it a bit more pointy. Have quick origin on it, which by the way I also have on my quick favorites. And then let's take this whole element and make sure it's connected here or put in place where we have the other pin. So let me just select these two objects here, actually together with the lever, and isolate it so that we see more where we have to position it in order to put a hole in there with a Boolean operation. So I'm gonna just now select this here again, and while we are in the X-ray mode, I'm gonna select these vertex points and bring that closer together. Otherwise we have to drill too much of a hole in there. So now let's add another cylinder here with our Q blocker. I'm gonna have 12 edges or 12 segments, and then we can just draw it here onto that other object, and we already have it almost in place. So now we just position it here, and we just want to make sure that it covers this pin that we have there. And once we have that, we select the other object here. Let's also take that into isolation mode. And then we can use our JMesh plugin, select it and put that to difference. And then let's just make sure we have our mirror still on, but we apply our Boolean operation. So now we have that on both sides. And then we should go ahead and clean that up here, because we want to make sure that we have it triangulated here. So let's just use our shift to make multiple vertex selections, and then we press J to connect. This one, let's do it over here. And then let's also do it here on that side. We're not actually gonna see much of the inside ever, most likely, but let's just do it anyway, so that we rule out any issues there with overlapping geometry. Actually, let me connect it like this here. I'm gonna dissolve these two edges. Let me undo that. Dissolve, not delete. And now let's also connect it here to these corners. And then also here at the bottom, let's have some of these connections. And then this one here, no, let me undo that. I want to connect it also here to that point. So that gives us this element here pretty much done now. And let's now go over here to our orthographic view, and I want to also take these elements and position it a bit to the side. Because as the next thing, I'm going to bring up QBlocker to have another one of these 12-sided cylinders. Draw that onto the other object. And then we also need to cut a hole into this existing element here in the background. I'm just gonna delete that pin and copy the other one because we already did some changes on that one, which we also need on that one here. So just copying that back into place here. And now I'm just gonna position this here a bit further. And let's just take that into isolation mode so that we see better. Gonna snap into our top view. And let's just draw that all the way out here. Now with that selection, let's use our picker. And then we're gonna use a difference Boolean operation on it. We can then apply the Boolean, and our mirror modifier is still working on it, so whatever we do on that side also happens on the other side. And now, same as before, we just have to make sure that we triangulate it here, which might be a bit boring to do. But at least we only have to do it on one side, thanks to our mirror modifier taking care of it on the other side. So almost done here with that. Now, actually, let me undo that and connect this one here to that one. So now we have this here in place. And what I want to do is also have a connection here. And this one I'm going to connect here to that point. So this is this element here pretty much done. What I'm going to do is make a ring selection here on the inside pieces. And I'm just gonna scale it all down here because it appeared a little bit too big. Now we can adjust this here, and that way it fits perfectly. I also wanna cap these pieces here at the end. So I'm just gonna make these edge loops and press F to fill it, because I forgot to do that earlier. And now let's just make sure that these points here also come out the right way there at this hole. This one here also looks like it needs some adjustment. Let me also go into X-ray mode, and now it looks much better. These are the small details that are worth paying attention to. Small details combined make all the difference. And now let's just rotate that up here. Doesn't have to be exact for the moment, but basically we have our pivot points there in place, and now if we put that here to local mode, we can make that a bit more interesting. I'm gonna press Ctrl so that I can make this step rotation here. And now let's rotate this one here back down. We can be more precise if we pull that handle further out. Let me undo that. And now let's make it so that this one touches the other. And also we can rotate it a bit here to the left, and then here on that angle. That requires a little bit of looking around and might require a few attempts to get it right. but basically everything needs to be connected in a way where it's not intersecting and that it looks like physics actually apply to it. So now this element here on that pin, I want to select these vertex points and just give it a slight rotation to make that a bit more interesting looking. The same here. Let's rotate that a bit. And actually here for that pin, I changed my mind. Let's rotate it in that direction so that it's not the same as the other one. So these are the small details. So now what I want to do is add some text here to the grenade, because later we're going to have a material ID, color ID map that we can use for texturing. I'm going to take our reference image, drag it out of the collection so that we have our own folder here, which I'm going to call high poly. So that means we have this nicely structured, and now with Shift A, let's add some text and let's call it the obvious stun grenade, which is actually also written on there. So we're just going to add the text that's on the references, which I already wrote on a readme text, and I'm just going to copy it out there. So in your case, you can just follow the tutorial here and add the same text that I copy and paste. I'm going to center the text and make it much smaller, the size, and then with that here, let me just go over to object mode and rotate it 90 degrees. Once again, with control, we can snap it, and then also in that direction here. So let's make sure it's another 90-degree snap or rotation. And then let's just scale it so that it fits here onto that face. So let's just select this text here and then bring it closer here to the element. We can also change the transform mode back to global if we want. And then here under our text settings, let's add some depth to it. So that gives it a bit of a bevel, and then we can also extrude it out here. And then let's actually intersect it here with this element. And now let's copy this here. I'm gonna rotate it 60 degrees. And actually it's better to remain in the local mode for that, so that we see our transform. That way we can easier work here with our pivot. And again, I'm gonna copy and rotate 60 degrees. And from our top perspective, we can very quickly just copy and paste that all around here. So let's just continue doing that. And then I'm gonna copy and paste the text that's gonna be added to each one of them out of a README that I already have here on my second monitor. This text, I basically looked it up on the references and I've wrote it down in a README so that you don't have to watch me type every letter here, which would only add to the time. So I still have to select the text, and then I just Ctrl-V it, copy and paste. That's why you see my mouse disappearing on my second monitor. Now let's also select that one, and I'm just gonna go through them one by one, which is pretty cool to see that we can actually work in Blender almost like in a README text with copy and paste, and that makes it definitely easy if you have some serious text to do in 3D, maybe for some environment art, some walls that have a text. The text tool is really powerful here in Blender. So now this one here is the last one, I think. Yeah, now we have all these 6 pieces. and they read the proper text as I see it on the reference, and I'm just gonna center that a bit more here. So let me get out of the isolation mode, and then I want to copy this text here, and I'm gonna change it to CYS, which is also something that's written there on that fuse. So now there's more text. I'm gonna copy this one here because it already has this angle, the 60-degree angle, and then just bring it down here. And I'm gonna once again paste the text that I already have here. It has some patent on it here. US patent. And now what I want to do is take this element here, and we're gonna start making our high poly. We're gonna use the select sharp edges, and we're gonna increase the sharpness so that it really catches these edges here. And we increase the mean bevel weight to 1. Now we can add a bevel modifier, and we just have to put it to the right settings. I'm gonna uncheck clamp overlap, put our offset to 0.02, limit method to weight, and now with that I'm gonna add the subdivision surface. And we can put it here up to, let's say, 4, so that we have enough subdivisions. So let's get out of the isolation view, and I'm gonna select that center piece and collapse our solidify modifier. So now we can also add our sharp edges here, put the bevel weight to 1, and now we have this selection. We select the other one, Ctrl L, and make a modifier link which copies it. Let's select that piece, and I'm just wanna cap that here at the bottom. So I'm just gonna use also an inset, same here, so that we have it nicely collapsed there. And then same thing. Let's make that selection here. We can increase the sharpness a bit so that we catch it all. And then same thing. And now we can also again copy the modifiers by selecting these two and then Ctrl L and modifiers. So this is a really cool thing that we can do here in Blender, to just copy and paste. We can also enable our cavity here so that we see a bit more the sharpness. We can also turn shadow on, looks a bit nicer maybe. So now let's also work here on that piece. And I'm just gonna do it here manually by selecting these edge loops. These ones here too. And then these ones here and the one at the bottom. And then again bevel weight to 1. Let's zoom out, and then once again selecting one of these objects here together with the other, and Ctrl L modifiers. Actually, I'm gonna disable the shadow because I notice it's getting a little slow. My computer is not the fastest anymore, unfortunately. Time for an upgrade at some point. Now let's work on that one. I'm gonna deselect some of these edges that I don't want to add. We still have the mirror modifier, so it does it on both sides. These ones here I want to disable on that ring there. Disable, I mean the bevel weight. Same as here. And then let's see also here, I'm gonna disable that one. You see the blue ones are the ones that we want to have weighted, and everything else is without any weight information. Now same thing, and because we copied something that didn't have a mirror modifier, we have to now apply the mirror modifier back. And in that case, I'm gonna bring the mirror on top of everything. to get rid of that seam, but now we also have to adjust our merge threshold to make that a bit prettier here. And I'm gonna dissolve that edge here, which leads to some weird pinch. And here we also have some issue. What I'm gonna do is put our emitter type to patch, and that kind of fixes it. So sometimes it's a matter of playing around here with these bevel settings. I'm gonna get rid of the bevel weight here on that corner and also over here, so that we have a nice curve there. So that pretty much takes care here of that element. And now we can go to our rings. And one thing that I just noticed is that this here is not welded as it should be. So I'm gonna select everything and then merge by distance, and that actually welds it. Just make sure you're not welding too much. 20 vertices are welded on both of them. And now same thing, we select sharp edges, put our bevel weight up, and then we just copy it over here with Ctrl L. And now you can see that we have a bit of an issue here where we need some additional edge. We can use the loop cut for that and bring it up here all the way, or almost all the way, and same here, some support loops. So now same thing applies here. Let's select this triangle and we have our sharp edges put to mean bevel weight 1, and then we can copy it here from that other ring. And then also again the same thing applies, where now this looks weird because we need an additional support loop. So that takes care of it here with our loop cut, which is also a very cool tool that we have here in Blender. So let me just change that back here to global, our transform orientation. And now we can work on these pins. Let's take it in isolation mode. And I'm just gonna go in edge mode and I make new selections here with Shift and Alt. And then also here on these ones. And then let's not forget also here at the end of it. Then we add our weight information and we just have to do the same thing over here. So Shift and Alt to add to our selection. And then once we have that, we add our weight to it. So now we can go out of isolation and then same as before, let's make it a high poly. And maybe in that case we want to actually have it a little bit less here, the offset. And I'm going to add some extra iteration on our subdivision too. Now we can copy that here onto the other. And that makes it a nice high poly pin here on each one of them. So here with that piece, I noticed that some things are not welded properly. I'm going to select everything in the vertex mode and then merge by a very small distance here. And that takes care of it here. Might be the same on your end. So now I'm going to select again the sharp edges, put our bevel weight up. I don't want to have bevel information here on that, so I'm going to disable it, turn it off. And here, same thing. I don't want to have any weight there. So I put that down, and with that selection here, I'm going to add a subdivision, and then I'm going to bevel it here, these edges, because I think that will look better if we scale that a bit down here like that. And since we still have the mirror, it's doing the same thing on the other side. So now I'm going to use our cut tool to add a support loop here, which will be better for the high poly. once we have our modifiers on it. Just making sure here that this is properly connected. And also over here, I want to turn that bevel weight off. So we can also enable this little button there so that we always see what we do on one side with the symmetry modifier. And then I'm gonna go ahead and make some extra connections here. And then I'm gonna use our loop cut to once again add some extra support loop here, all in preparation for the high poly. Here I want to add bevel weight, and now I'm gonna just add a new modifier. I'm gonna put it to 0.01. I'm not gonna copy this here because this might require a little bit of extra adjustment here. That's why I'm gonna do it from scratch here. So here also subdivision surface, and then this one I wanna add some bevel weight so that we don't have this overlap. And here I'm gonna dissolve this edge because it causes some weird artifact otherwise. Let's go in the bevel settings, and I wanna change that over here to patch for the outer meter type. And then we have some extra edges here that require some bevel weight to get rid of this overlapping. And now let's just zoom out and take a look here. This piece is a little bit tricky, so we have to put a bit of extra effort. Gonna also have a bevel weight here. And then I'm gonna actually increase our offset to 0.02. And here we have some weird stuff going on, which we can get rid of if we turn off the bevel weight there. And here we have another pinch, which I'm gonna get rid of by dissolving that edge. And now on that piece, I'm just gonna unhide the bevel and subdivision so that we better see what's going on. I wanna add a loop cut here and then make some more connections here. Basically have a support edge loop there where before we didn't have it, and that results then in a better looking high poly. So now we can add this back on and we have less of a pinch there. And I also want to add some text here on the top. I stumbled upon this reference which I didn't see before, so that's why we're gonna do it now. And this text we can just copy here from the already existing one, and it says fuse E7R6. And the thing is that this text is actually engraved into this. So I'm gonna get rid of the extrude and the depth, and now I convert that to a mesh, the text. I want to go in face mode, select everything with A, and then use an inset like that here. You can also be more careful with control to make a small inset. And then we push this down like that. And now in order to make it a bit more high poly, we can just add a bevel modifier. Gonna disable clamp and put this to a very low threshold here, 0.005. And that looks weird, but if we check it over here to angle and absolute, now you can see that we don't have these weird pinches, so that should look fine in the high poly. Even if you see some weird fragments, don't worry about it. This is engraved in there. Also, we have another element, and I'm just gonna copy it from this existing one here. Let's just take that vertex point, grow the selection with Ctrl+, and then we can just Shift and D, snap it back, and now we take this element And let's just put it there where we also saw it on the reference. Now this element here we can also separate out. And the cool thing with Blender is that it will always remember the modifiers that we had on it, even if we separate it. So since this is a detail that is only visible for our bake, for our normal map, I'm gonna push that back out here like this and then scale it up so that it looks like it has some depth here once we bake our normal map. I'm gonna put the offset further down here, 0.01. And then I want to have this loop here with a bevel weight on it. And that gives us this nice detail here that we can just bake into our normal map later on. So let's see what else we can do. I want to start by putting a proper naming convention onto our high poly. Let's go over to our batch rename. And I'm gonna have it set to name and then method new, and with everything selected in our folder I'm just gonna say object. Now you can see everything is already given that name, and we're gonna go back in here and we want to put it to suffix and now underscore high. So now you can see that everything here is properly set for our bake later on. I'm gonna duplicate the collection, hide the high poly, so we're only left here with that folder, and let's call that low poly. And now we have to get rid of the underscore high. So in order to do that, let's go back here and then we put it to find and replace. And we want to find underscore high 0.001 and we replace it with underscore low. So here we go. Now everything is the same name but with underscore high and underscore low. For example, here we have this pin, and then here the same pin just with underscore low on the object 10. It's the same object, so that ensures our bake later on. Now here on the low poly, what I want to do is select the text, which we see in our scene collection, and just delete it. And then manually also let's delete these floating elements for baking. Let's get rid of it. And then here on all these objects that we have here, we can now make use of this awesome plugin that we downloaded earlier. So we can toggle the visibility, but that shows us that some of these elements here, we have to first collapse the mirror modifier before we then get rid of the other modifiers. So let's collapse everything that has a mirror modifier. And now with that selected, everything here, we can then just go over here and remove all the modifiers. So yeah, this plugin is really awesome. Thanks to my friend Enrico for showing me. And let's enable our high poly and hide the low poly, and let's add some materials here to our different objects. So I'm gonna start with the text. Let's have it here to a green. And then I'm gonna select all the other text elements that should also have that same color ID. And also we have one here at the bottom. This is all the same color on the reference. So now we can go back here to that one. Control and L, and we just copy and paste the materials to the other ones. Now here on that fuse, let's have its own material. And that CYS is also part of that. It's the same color on the reference. And now here on our lever, let's put that to blue. And that, since it's engraved into it, should also be blue. So here on that lever, we actually have some color at the bottom. And in order to add that, I'm gonna make use of our loop cut tool and add these extra edge loops here. Let's press S, Z, and 0 to align it. And then we can go over here and select everything. Let me just switch over here to the face mode. And then actually I'm gonna add a new material here. And let's just put it here to red maybe. Or let's have it yellow, and let's assign it. And now we have an issue here which we can easily get rid of by going back here to this edge loop that we just cut in, and then we just say Ctrl and B, and we give it 2 divisions, and that fixes this otherwise conflict here that we had with the material. And this is just the high poly we're working on, so it's not like we're adding extra loops to our low poly right now. Let's also have a material color here for these pins. All these elements here should have the same color. So then I'm just gonna copy and paste them over. So now what we still have to do is take that piece here in the center. And once we're in isolation mode, we see more. I'm just gonna make a blue color here. And now we have this element here at the bottom, and I'm just gonna grow the selection on it. And then with this here, I'm gonna assign it to the current selection and then Ctrl I to reverse the selection. And now we need a new material here for the other part. So let's put that here to, it doesn't matter which color, as long as it's different color IDs. Later in the texture software, we can then just pick from it. So here, I'm just gonna put it to maybe some dark green. Once again, it's just so that we have some information for the color ID, and then we can just copy that to the other parts so that this here is one ID. So you can see we also have this band there. And I want to actually select that, but it's a bit tricky because we collapsed our solidify earlier. I'm gonna make some loop selections here, convert it to face by pressing Ctrl. And then we can take away here from that selection. Go over here to the circle select. And I'm just gonna put the radius down a bit. And just select the parts here in the center, which are otherwise hard to grab. So this is a practical way of selecting it. We just have to make sure we don't select anything we don't want to have, like I just had it there. So now with that selection, we can once again create a new material here. And that way we have this ring there, or this band. Now let's see what it looks with the modifiers. And right now we still have this selection active. If I get out of it, you will then see that it kind of messes it up here. Let's get out of it here. So that's a matter of putting the bevel a bit up. I'm gonna put it here to 2 segments actually. And instead, I'm gonna make that a bit softer here on the offset. So that way we don't have a messed up color information there for our matte ID later on. Now, let me just grab these vertex points here on that element, because that actually should be more in there. So I'm just gonna a little bit push that into the other element. Same here at the bottom. And that will actually look better than once we bake it later. We don't have to do that on the low poly. This is just for the high poly. Now, I actually don't like to have this comma there, so let's just make that dots. So here's another element that also needs a color ID. Let's grow that selection. And then we have a new material for it. Let's just assign it some blue. And now we see a bit of bleeding here, which we can just get rid of by making an edge loop selection here. And then we can give it a bevel, Control and B. Doesn't have to be big, just a little bit. And I'm gonna add another one here in the center, just with a mouse wheel, so that we have an extra segment, which we can then bring down. And then we can also add some bevel weight to it. So that pretty much concludes our high poly. Let's go over to low poly and select these 3 elements, because we can save some polygons by welding that better together as it currently is, where we have these 3 loose objects. I'm just gonna delete this whole segment here at the bottom, and I want to do the same thing here. Let's just take that vertex and delete it. So that opens it up here at the top and at the bottom. And now we have this thing here where we have this ring that we would never see. So I'm just gonna delete these edges and do the same thing also here at the bottom. So now the thing is that because we already have names assigned to these 3 objects, we have to be careful what we do next. I'm gonna select that upper piece, this one at the bottom, and then the center piece. Control J to join it, and that joins it as object 001 for these 3 elements, which are now 1. Now I select all vertices and I'm gonna weld it here by distance. So now we have this properly target welded. And now we just have to go back here into the bottom. I'm gonna make an edge loop and then just say D for extrude and let go of the right mouse button. And then we can just scale that selection in here like that, because we don't want to cap it all the way through. That will save us some space on our texture once we get to the unwrapping in just a moment. Same here, I'm gonna select that loop, extrude, snap it back, and then just scale it in here like that. So once again, this is just to save some texture space instead of having the whole thing capped there. We can do the same thing here at the top, by the way. I'm just gonna delete that again. Then in edge mode, select that loop, extrude, snap it back, and then scale. So now what we have to do is go back to our high poly, because we still have some of these floating elements that we have to link together to the objects that are under it. In that case here we have object high, and here we have object 005. So let's go to object high, and then we just drag it onto object 005, which will then link it to it. So here we have object 004. Let's take object 19, which is this floating object, and drag it into object 004. Same here, object 017 also goes onto 04. And now this element, object 001, we want to parent object 002 onto it, because we were welding that on the low poly. I hope this is not too confusing, but this is because we welded it on the low poly, so these 2 elements need to be all object 001, and the same goes for this text here. So these elements will then bake as 1 and also being recognized as 1 high poly. So same for that text. That all goes here to object 001. Let's just drag it on there. So now, as you can see, we have the same names once again here for our high and low, but there's one more thing to do. We have to open that up, what we were just linking, select these sub-objects, and then under batch rename, we want to go to find and replace, find underscore high, and then we just replace it with nothing, because if it says underscore high, it will get confused with a bake. So that's something that I forgot to do before. Now we can just do that here again on all the linked objects that we just put on there. All these floating objects. This one here as well. So that this doesn't say underscore high, or else the baker gets confused later on. So essentially that takes care of the high poly. So with our low poly selected, I'm gonna press Ctrl A and apply all transforms to rule out that we have any rotation or location errors. And now let's go over to our UV editing mode, and it's time for some unwrapping fun. So for that, under preferences, make sure you have text tools installed, as well as UV squares, which I already showed in the last tutorial, but I'm gonna have the link in the description. So these two plugins are essential. I'm gonna add a checker map here. And now let's go over in the edit mode by pressing tab. And then we can disable that checker map in the 2D view. We don't really need that. Here in our edit mode, I'm gonna select one of these beveled edges, Shift G, and then select similar bevel weights. So now we have all our previous bevel weighted edges selected, and then we can right click and say mark seam. And now we just have to define some more seams. I'm gonna press Ctrl here to make a connecting seam here on that element. And then let's take this element here into isolation mode. And the cool thing is that we can still do changes here. For example, these two edge loops, I want to actually give it a bit of a bevel. Just to make that a bit more appealing looking on the low poly, I'm going to clear those seams actually. This one here as well, clear seam. I'm going to leave the one there at the bottom when you look at it from top. And now let's also mark that here as a seam so that we can unwrap that as a stripe. Here in the inside, I'm gonna select this one and then press Ctrl to make a connection, mark that as a seam. So we are defining our UV islands right now. Now I'm gonna press A, then U, and then unwrap. You can now see that we have a dialog here at the bottom. We can, for example, change the margin to make it more obvious, our UV islands. So you can see that we have all these rings now here on the left side that we unwrapped, and that's because we didn't define a seam yet for all these cutout holes. And we want to unwrap these as stripes. So that's why we have to tell Blender, like, look, this is where the seam goes. And in that case, let's just put it here at the top. So each one of these we have to select. And then once we're done, we click the right mouse button again and say mark seam. And now if we unwrap again, select A, you can see that this came out as stripes now. I'm gonna go over here to our UV selection mode, which is basically the element mode. And all these elements that look like stripes, we're gonna select, and now let's make use of UV squares and snap with equal distance. So that makes this plugin really great. If we select UV sync, we see our currently unwrapped object even if we don't have any active selection on it. But now I'm gonna just select everything here on that grenade, and I just wanna add a bigger checker pattern texture. So I'm gonna put it to 8K, and now you can see that we actually see these tiles way better as before. So let's carry on here with these rings and this triangle. I'm gonna delete these support loops that we had on the high poly. Dissolve edges, and then we have them also here on that round one on both sides. So let's just get rid of it. We only need it in the high poly. And now we already have our marked seams for the caps, but we also have to define a marked seam that goes all the way here through it. In that case, I'm gonna put it a bit here at the back so that we don't see the seam too much. Somehow this also selected that one. I'm gonna disable the marked seam for it, uncheck it. And now let's just unwrap everything. And now we can make perfect use here. Let me just get out of UV Sync, because in UV Sync we can select in element mode. UV selection to select these two. And then perfect use case for snap with equal distance. You can see how this UV squares is really doing a fantastic job. Now let's carry on here with these pins. And what I'm gonna do is select everything and unmark everything. And then I'm just gonna make new selections here with Shift and Alt. Might be a little bit hard to see because it's blue on blue, but now with the marked seam, you can see where I put it. Let's have these marked seams here. And then we have to do the same thing here on that side as well. So let's also do it here on that side, and then let's mark it, and then also here. Mark seam. And now let's select both of them with A, U, and unwrap. And then once again, let's select these elements and make use of our snap with equal distance. So let's go and select our fuse. Let's take it into isolation, and then I'm just gonna clean that up a bit because we have some edges here that we can then dissolve, because we only need those as support edges on the high poly. So let's make sure we don't delete anything that we actually need. But these ones here on the side we can get rid of. And let's just take another look around here. I think I'm gonna leave this one here, but then I'm gonna have a seam going through here. And we can actually dissolve this edge there in the center first. That only adds to our poly count. And let me just select it here from the top. These edges I'm gonna mark as seam. And that way we can also unwrap that as a stripe. Now let's take a look here where we also have to define an edge seam on both sides. Mark it. And then what I'm gonna do here with that, I'm gonna select these loops, dissolve edge, and then do the same thing here for these three, also dissolve it. And let's do that also here on that side, because that detail we can really just have as high poly. We don't need to have that. The normal map will take care of that. Now on that side, let me unmark that here, clear seam. And also here, these ones, clear seam. And let's take another look. Let's define another seam here. And then also here at the bottom. So these are once again our UV islands. This one here we can leave. Let's leave that. And then this one here I forgot. We don't want to have this split there. So let's clear that seam. And then let's see what happens. A and unwrap. And we have some issue here on that element. Let's see if we can fix that. If we put it here to conformal, but it's still messed up. So let's see what we can do about that. We have to go back here on our edit window, and then let's define a different seam where we have it marked. So I'm actually gonna mark these seams here at the bottom. Now let's try again. And now it looks good. So in that case, I had to go back, change it around, and you can see how this is very responsive. We can work on our model and unwrap at the same time. It's really great. So we don't have to jump out of the unwrap editor to do that. We do it here in real time. So let's take a look here at our lever. And I want to select everything here on that element from the top view while we are in X-ray mode. And I'm gonna unmark these seams. Clear seam. And then let's take another look around. I'm gonna make a edge selection here on these and clear those, because this can all be one UV island here on that element. Now I'm actually gonna take these edges and I want to dissolve them. Let's do that on both sides. Dissolve edge. And now what else do we have? I'm gonna make a proper connection here with J. And let's take another look around this piece here. From the bottom, we also can clear the seam, same as we did on the top. Clear seam. And then we have these rings here that we want to unwrap as stripes. We have to still define our marked seam. And then here at the bottom, we also want to tell it, look, this is where our marked seam is. Otherwise, this would be one massive long stripe. And now let's press U and unwrap. And there's another cool view that we have here in Blender. If we want to see what our stretching looks like, we enable display stretch. That shows us where our stretching is. Let's put that to conformal and see if that generates a better result, and I think it does. So sometimes it's a matter of playing around with these methods. Now I'm gonna select all these ones here and snap with equal distance so that we have them nice and straight. Then I'm gonna select this edge here, go to our text tools and align it. Same here for that one. And now on a second thought, I don't like how I was assigning these connections here. I'm just gonna redo that. It might not be essential to do, but I think it's cleaner that way here. Let's connect these vertex points like that. And here, let's also connect it. And then let's do the same thing here on that side. Let's connect it here the same way that we did it on the other side. Since we don't have our symmetry modifier on it anymore, we just have to do it the same way here on both sides. It might honestly not be essential to do that, but I think that results in a better edge flow here. If we zoom in here on our unwrap window, we can, by the way, also assign connections. So we can select that vertex point here in the UV window. Then with Shift, we select the other one. And then here in our modeling view, if we hover with the mouse over and say J, we can join it as well. So once again, that makes it really flexible here to be in the unwrapping mode of Blender, because we can work on our model without having to jump in and out of the unwrap editor. Now I actually want to dissolve these edges here and connect that in a different way, where I have these two vertex points selected and then I press J and I just make a straight connection through it and then connect these ones here. Let's assign it like that. And I think this results in a better topology than the one that we had before. So I'm just taking a look here now at this island that we have still as part of one UV mesh, and I want to separate that out. For that, I select these vertex points and then I press Ctrl and face mode to select it here and convert it into a face selection. Now if we go out of the UV sink, we can select that island and we can just move it to the side, and that separates it out. Now if we enable our UV sink again, you can see we have these separated islands. Now let's work on that piece. And I actually want to rotate that with our control snap in a 5-degree way so that this is perfectly straight. I don't know why it was distorted before. I'm going to delete these vertex points so that we can then unwrap only 1/2 of it so that we don't consume up so much textile space. Let's select these edges and then clear those seams. And everything else we can already just take like that here. And now we just have to get out of the UV sink so that we can select our elements. It's kind of confusing that we can't do that in the same mode, but it is what it is. Now we can use our snap with equal distance. And we have the perfect unwrap for it. Now let's go to text tools. And with that object selected, we hit that textile size picker, which determines a random size here for that one. Now we press A for everything and say apply. Now we resized everything to being the same textile density. And now we can select everything together here. Go over to UV, and then we want to pack these islands. Now I'm gonna open that and uncheck rotate, and then we can play with our margin. But first what I'm gonna do is take these rings here and I'm actually gonna put them outside so that we can pack again. We just have to uncheck rotate. And now let's put a margin here that fills it up the best way while also still leaving a little bit of space in between the islands. That seems to work fine. And now we can put these rings here back in there without using up our precious texture space. So this would be the only manual adjustment that we do. Everything else is automatically packed here, and very well done. So let's just also scale that up a bit here. Have that in here. And maybe that one I want to scale a little bit further down so that we have more space there once again. So that leaves us only with 2 more things to do in our low poly. You can see how we don't have smoothing groups assigned yet. We're going to do that in just a moment. But then we also have to copy this piece here back into place. I'm gonna make a copy, snap it back, and then let's just rotate it around like that here. So now with that copied element, we have to go back in our unwrap for it, and we have to push that out of the way by a factor of 1. For that, I'm gonna go over here to where it says image, and then on the Y, I'm just gonna say 1. We can also do it on the X so that our bake doesn't get confused later down the road. So now let's take a look here at our namings. I'm gonna select the copied version, select the other one, and then we join it so that we have object 003_low. Then we're just gonna select these verts and weld it together. So now basically we have that piece here finished, and what we can do now is go over here and we want to get rid of the currently selected checker pattern material and assign a new material that we just called Flashbang. So I'm just gonna lower the color, then reverse the selection, Ctrl L, and copy the material to the other parts. They are all the Flashbang material now. Now I'm gonna use Text Tools UV Smoothing, which assigns smoothing groups based on our UV islands, and that's what we need for the perfect bake. So now we have both our low poly and high poly finished. However, there is 2 more things that I want to do on the high poly. I'm gonna switch to modeling mode, flip to material mode, and now let's hide the low poly. And let's take that into isolation mode here, our fuse. And I'm gonna add a darker material, add metallicness, and also increase the roughness. And that makes it kind of obvious that we have some nasty pinching here that looks kind of bad. So I'm gonna select this edge loop here where we have this problem. Gonna go over to item and I'm gonna increase the mean crease. That already takes care of it. And there is some more things that we can do. For example, take these points here and drag it closer here. That way we have less of a stretch there. Now this already looks better. And then I also want to add an edge loop here, for which I'm going to use the loop cut so that at the bottom this doesn't look so washed out. So basically just have another support loop here. And we can also, by the way, put that to even. That way it's perfectly straight. And let me take another look around here. That takes care of the fuse, but then we also have a bit of a problem here if I take a look at it. It's a little bit too soft. So I'm gonna go over here to our modifier. And then if we scroll up, let's put the distance here to a smaller amount. Like that here. And then I'm gonna switch to edge mode. And I also wanna select these loops here. And also give it a bit of a mean crease. So now we have less of pinching issues there. Also here I noticed there's a bit of an issue which we can quickly get rid of by using the knife tool. And we just make a connection here. And since we have still the symmetry on, it does it on both sides. I'm also gonna cut through here, which results in a better edge flow and less pinching. So that concludes the modeling and unwrapping in Blender. Next we're gonna bake and texture in Marmoset Toolbag 4. Let's enable both the low poly and the high poly and select it together. And then we're gonna export that out as one FBX. I'm gonna have a new folder called Bake and Texture for that. And since we're doing that in Marmoset, it can only be one FBX. It doesn't have to be both the high poly and the low poly. I'm gonna put it to selected objects here, export. So we're gonna bake and texture in Marmoset, but if you wanna bake in Marmoset and texture in Substance Painter, you will need a separate low poly. So let's export that out here individually. So next we're gonna bake and texture this in Marmoset Toolbag 4. I hope you liked the tutorial. Stay tuned for more to come and come join us on the Chamfer Zone Discord. Cheers, Tim.